I think that in this pandemic and in this whole season and everything that is going on in our world and in our country right now, it's opening up our eyes, and it's kind of showing us what position we are in, and it's highlighting the position of other people, and it's making us ask the question, like, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to use the position that we're in, or the privilege that we have to impact people? And I think this pandemic has showed me just how much privilege I have, and I think I knew it before, but I think it just highlighted it for me, in that I'm not experiencing the effect of the pandemic like a lot of people around the globe are, or I don't experience the impact or the brokenness or the heartbreak that other people experience because of how I grew up and where I grew up and my community and my surroundings. And I don't want to just sit in that, and I don't want, as a community, us to just sit in that. I want us to actually grow together and actually learn, like, what does this mean for our lives when we figure out the position that we are in, the voice that we have? What are the next steps for us to take, and how do we even move forward? And so I think that's the question that I want us to ask today. Well, hey, Jon, thank you so much for joining us for our third conversation for the Ascent.
It's my privilege to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do here at Riverwood?
Yeah, I've been with Riverwood since it started. Now my title would officially be the community pastor, but I, as one of the pastors, just oversee all the programming that we do in our neighborhood and some of the movements that we have internationally, and just really the expression of our church that falls outside the walls of our buildings typically, or our church operations. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how long have you worked here for?
Oh, I guess I've worked here. We just had our 25th church anniversary, and technically I started part-time the very first summer that the church was going, but that was on a summer grant running a day camp, and then went through college and then started full-time, I think 2 or 3 years into the church. So somewhere around 23 or 20, whatever.
It's actually crazy. You have known me my whole life, not your whole life.
I have
my whole life.
Your whole life.
That's
yes.
So weird. Yeah. Fun fact for everyone out there. They won't actually care, but that's okay. What led you to want to be a community pastor?
Well, I kind of migrated into it, the position I'm in now. I began kind of with the, as a young engagement there, running all the music and then also in youth programming. So that's, was my entry point. And back then it was just, we were growing, and I found the roles that I could fill. And then, I'd say, I don't know, about 6 or 7 years into the church, I always knew I had a bit of a mark of compassion in my life that God had placed, and always had a real affinity towards seeing need and wanting to be a part of that, being in that. And so I think I migrated there, and it just became a natural fit, especially when we moved into this neighborhood here in Elmwood. It became a mission of our church just to really make an impact on the needs around us in our neighborhood, not just to exist with a postal code in Elmwood, but to have an impact on the neighborhood, and to really see some of the issues and see the causes of them, and to be a part of helping there. And so that became a natural step for me to take, and stepped into that. And yeah, for the last, I don't know, I guess 15 years or so, that's been the role that I've played.
Wow. So for a lot of people, they have like a set moment where they can remember at first seeing like injustice or poverty. Do you have a moment like that where you remember so clearly, like where everything changed?
That's a great question. I think certainly I would point back to when I was in youth group, I was taken on a trip. We would call them a mission trip, but we went to northern Mexico, and I'd say I saw a lot of poverty there that really did mark me. So I think that was a really important experience for me. But I would rewind it even further in my life. Growing up, my dad was the director of Youth for Christ, and so I knew him in the context of ministry, but he also would often get involved with some of the at-risk kids that he was dealing with. He would get personally involved. He would, see a need and then we would, as a family, kind of engage to help meet a need. So that ranged from, sometimes seeing kids come over to our place to get some help, or going somewhere to rescue something or to whatever. So we were just observers as we grew up in that.
Yeah.
And then my parents also, for many years, fostered. We were a foster home, and so I always had foster brothers or sisters in the house, and that became a part of our experience of just knowing that we needed to be a safe place for other people. And so I think those were really formative experiences for me in growing up, and just realizing that our world was bigger than us, and even special events like Christmas. We always looked for somebody to invite to Christmas dinner.
Wow.
Like, who doesn't have a place to be? And so our norm, even family-wise, was to have others have space in our house. Yeah,
that's cool how that just was so much a part of growing up, and now it's that is still your reality. And that's something I think that you're doing with your family, of bringing your kids to the Christmas gatherings, like Christmas Day with the community and that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool. It's become really important for me to recognize the value that gave in my life, and to impart that to my kids. And so I've actually, in the role that I have, often I get involved in situations that maybe are feel a little bit more mature or risky, that I have to get involved in. But I've not often shied away from involving my kids in seeing that. Obviously, I don't place them into high risk.
Right.
But I haven't tried to shelter them from seeing some of those realities. And I think that's an important thing for me, is them to see, hey, the way that our lives are, the safety even of this house isn't always the norm for everybody. And I want you to see that. I want you to feel the impact, and also see that we carry a responsibility to that. So when we have privilege, or I've been granted privilege in the sense that I had a loving home. I never questioned my value to my parents. I was given opportunity. I was, we didn't have a ton of resource growing up, but there was nothing that was not available to me, and schooling, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so with that, it comes with a responsibility, and I want my kids to really see that.
Yeah. And that's something that I've been thinking about lately with the pandemic going on. It's for the first time in a long time, our entire world is involved in the exact same thing. Yet our experiences, even from one community to the other, one household to another, is so different.
Yeah.
I think I've been realizing that I am so privileged in this pandemic. As someone who has a really stable family, I have a job. I've never at one point in this pandemic questioned, am I going to have money for food or to pay for my house or any of that?
Yep.
But that's not the reality for so many people. So I'm experiencing this pandemic very differently. Do you think that privilege plays a role in the pandemic, and what do you see with that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does, without question. It's this season of our lives is going to be very fascinating to me to see what we emerge with, because I think there's multiple things. One is, on one hand, those that are privileged, one of the natures of this virus is that it doesn't care about privilege, and so the actual impact of the virus is a threat to anybody equally. And so I think there's something in the psyche there where it was everything that I have can't actually protect, and especially at the onset when we didn't know how severe or how far-reaching this would be. I mean, there's still a lot of questions about that, but I think at the onset there was a sense of we're all in the same boat as far as impact. That's, I think, more physically to the virus. Now, certainly privilege, I think, has played a role in how we maneuver through it. I think, it was really interesting to me at the beginning in our setting, in our society. We've never really experienced a true level of scarcity from a societal point of view. There's a lot of people that live with some scarcity, but on a society level, I think at the beginning there was questions of hey, are we going to have? I mean, the toilet paper, the yeast, the whatever it might be, name the one piece that flew off the shelves quickly. And there was a sense of panic around that, I think, because most people haven't tasted scarcity in their lives, and so they didn't quite know what to do with it, and it quickly turned inward. protective. I need to protect my family or whatever. And I had an interesting, I'm going off track here a little bit, but I had an interesting experience early on where I just had this moment of clarity where we do some support work in Eswatini. And so there's these rural communities that we support and help to get kids access to education, to food and such. And when we go to visit there, we often do home visits, and we'll bring a gift to the home. And it's usually a big bag of beans or rice and some food or whatever, just to give to the household. And they live in scarcity. I mean, more than we'll ever know. But their gut reaction, or their initial reaction, almost across the board, is when they get a gift like that, is to immediately piece it out and share it with their neighbors, because they know their neighbors are in need, like their physical neighbors. That's their first instinct. Is to say, okay, this is amazing, but my neighbor needs, and my neighbor needs. And I had this moment at the beginning of this pandemic where it just was like in stark contrast to what we were seeing around us. In the first sight of scarcity, for some, our initial instinct wasn't, hey, my neighbor needs. It was like, I gotta fill my house up. And even in the face of that, knowing that if I'm going to go and buy a bunch, it's actually going to make it less available to others. So it was just a very fascinating kind of initial response. And I think we learned some things about ourselves, and then we're growing in that and hopefully exposing some things to our society.
How do you begin to change that mindset even? So like the people in Eswatini, their first reaction is like, okay, I'm going to go give this to other people. Yet our first reaction is like, how much can I get for myself? How do we even begin to like change that? Because that's just like a lifetime of wiring that we've had in us.
I mean, this is a daunting task to even answer that, or it just feels like an overwhelming question, because I think it's structural. I think it's the structure of our society, but even of just the values that we've built some of our economy on, really celebrate individual in success. We haven't done a great job of building this idea that we are responsible to each other. I think that stuff is emerging, and it is within there is pieces of it, but when you that's part of what I love about the Eswatini culture, and what it does when we visit there is it exposes some of those poverties that we carry in different ways, so starkly, because they have such a sense of responsibility to their neighbor. And I think, that's a difficult one, because you can encourage, but oftentimes when we encourage people to move towards there, it's in the form of charity, which isn't always that helpful, and it's usually kind of maintains a power imbalance versus this idea that of equity, of being kind of on the same level, and sharing kind of a level ground with people, regardless of sort of.
Can you explain that a little bit more? The whole idea of like charity not actually being
like charity. I mean, charity is a necessity in many times when you have a famine, when you have a crisis. The right answer isn't always to just say, hey, let's fix the structure of that, or let's help resource the structure of it. It's to say there's an emergency. And so I think charity is needed in those contexts, but it oftentimes, especially perpetual charity, builds a sense, it just creates this uneven sense that there's the givers and there's the takers. And it actually kind of compounds on itself to actually steal away what people need in order to rise above some of those things. And so I think charity is necessary, and it's something that we're all motivated by, because I think we do have compassion for people. We see a need, but it's usually a safe version. It's usually arm's length. It's saying, hey, I see that need, but here's something to help it, not I'm going to get involved in a way that costs me more than sort of an arm's length reach. So it's a complicated thing. I mean, all of what we do is fueled in a sense by charity and giving, but I like to always push beyond that to say it's like we need to become people that move into solidarity, that move into the spaces of the need, not just to try and solve them at an arm's length.
So what do you do if you are a young adult who is very much just in their own world and their own community. How do you even begin to step into those spaces?
Yeah, I think, it's a great question. I think, there's a lot of ways. In fact, in many ways, the young adult culture, I think, is much more in tune with how to move into spaces and be comfortable in when things are not resolved, or to kind of spend time there. But I think it's just, it's about being willing to take some risks and to get to know, for me, it's always been this idea that we even, let's take our food bank, which is a charity model. And it's necessary at this moment, but the greatest joy for me in that help is often when people kind of are using it, and then we get to meet them, and we get to they get to trust us, and then all of a sudden at one point they open up their stories to us, and we realize there's so much more going on behind the scenes of this need. And so let's kind of now say, why is it that you need to use a food bank? And what are those things that have caused that need in your life, and how can I actually understand them, and then understand that maybe I'm a participant in creating that need in your life, and now how do I adjust myself to create equity there, because of the systemic issues that are underlying that. So I think it's about moving into spaces and then listening and learning and really understanding that when you're in a place of privilege, your voice becomes dominant, and oftentimes we disregard the voices of those that we maybe don't match the privilege, because we feel like, hey, maybe their voice doesn't count. They haven't shown success, so what do they have to contribute to the conversation? So, that might be some underlying truth to how we would see it.
Right.
But the reality is, there's so much value and intuition and understanding that we have to learn from people, and we often don't listen. So I would be my advice is to move into spaces where some of these things exist, to even move into places that are uncomfortable, and then to listen and to learn, because you'll understand a lot more what we typically kind of see on a bird's eye view as simplistic issues are often much more complex.
Yeah. You preached a sermon a while ago, and I still remember it really clearly. I think you were preaching Amos 5. Is that right? Where it was let justice flow like a river, or let righteousness flow like a river. Can you explain that a little bit? Because that really impacted me in the way that I see justice, and just the idea of it being a continual thing in our lives.
Right. I'm getting old, so I don't quite remember the sermon that I preached.
So I should have prepped you on that.
But I do. Amos is a very powerful book, and it's a book that was written as injustice was all over the place, and essentially just this very stern and maybe some harsh words in there, saying like, "Hey, you're missing the mark." And justice. It's the word in the Hebrew text is mishpah. It's actually often translated as righteousness. There's a lot of righteousness words in the Old Testament that are actually mean the same thing in its root as justice, and it is a core understanding of the world that was created by God to be in right relationship with each other, which means that we are so. That for me, the worldview is this: that when the world was created, when God dreamt up where we were, it was to be in right relationship with each other, with the earth that He created, and with our Creator, with God.
Yeah.
And so then the story of Scripture is about how that's been broken, and so it's been broken on many levels. Our relationship with God was broken. Our relationship with the earth was broken, and we see that, and we see the impact of that in a very severe way right now in our time. How we're really, just abusing this relationship that we were supposed to be caretakers of. But then with each other, that's to me is as apparent as ever that we've gotten outside of our, our way that we should be operating, and it always has been. I mean, we've always been broken in that, and there's so many ways that can be exposed in our society, in our lives, how we don't see each other on equal. I mean, even the events that we see right now are so important because they're bringing to light the inequity, and the racism that is underlying some of these pieces.
Yeah.
And that all of that comes back to this broken relationship that we have with each other, where, it's selfishness at its root. It's, and so privilege is an interesting thing because it exists, and it's not even that it's all bad. I mean, we all have experienced some forms of privilege in our lives, but it also is, on the other side of it, it exposes some of the dark sides of our society and ourselves. Right?
So what does it mean to let justice flow like a river?
Well, that to me is just the vision that God had for our earth, and to make room for God to move, and to move us to a place of seeing each other and being responsible to each other and caring for one another, and to building back up those that have lost their voice, giving them space, giving them, taking away the ways that we've utilized our privilege to just build more resources and say, no, this needs to be distributed in a proper way.
Yeah.
So that we all have access, that we all, and where it gets complex is that we often see them in simplistic ways of like, hey, just everybody pull up your boots and tie them up and get to work, and like that's just such a there's so much missing when we just view it as that in our own history. So typically for me anyways, I'd look back and say I had so much provided to me that and then when I hear other people's stories, it's like I think you're doing better than I would have if I was given your story.
Yeah.
And so what do you do with that?
Right.
But we often have high views of ourselves and what we've achieved, and discredit the ways in which that was kind of handed to us in many ways.
One of the ways that we're seeing young adults work towards fighting injustices is through their voice on social media.
Yep.
So we're seeing this a lot. I mean, social media is kind of our biggest platform. The average young adult will have between like 300 to 1,000 plus followers, and that's a huge following. That's more than most churches to let their voice be heard. But do you think that that is the best way to bring awareness and to fight some of the injustices in our world? Is that is that justice?
So I'm going to be careful with my answer because it could just make me irrelevant and old. But I think like social media, I guess, has some great merits to it. It is a bit of an equalizer, and so I think there's some really important ways in which that's become a movement to our modern culture of being able to, giving voice where voice would never have been heard. So I think some things emerge where it's like, hey, this incident would never have hit the radar, and yet it's important for everybody to hear about what's going on because it exposes this, right? So these are things that are valuable. Yeah. So I don't discredit it, but I think, and I guess this is just my perspective. I'm not very active on social media. I think my last post was in 2017 or something. So
your first and your last.
So. But I mean, I peruse it every once in a while, and I'm not totally disengaged. Yeah. But my take would be is that there's a great deal of pressure, probably especially on the young adult population, probably to do it to have your platform appear the right way. So if there was some sort of a movement on social media, you have to. Sometimes your decision isn't like, hey, let's jump on board because we need to fight that. It's more like, hey, what if I don't respond to that one? What am I going to look? Am I going to look on this side of the issue or this side of the issue? Or what if I say this? I have to be. So I think it at times probably led to us just trying to position ourselves or to create the right response from an acceptance point of view. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, but my instinct would be to say that that's a pressure that exists.
Sure, yeah.
And what you do with that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would say, probably my perspective would be, is that these issues arise and they're important, and so then you can use social media to bring awareness to it. But part of my questions would be like, hey, do you remember which cause you posted on 6 months ago?
Wow.
So what was it that you were really passionate about in that moment, because it rose to the surface of kind of social media at the time, and you're like, yeah, let's, I'm in, like, and you voiced it strong, and what was that? So if you'd retrace it, I'd like to know how you're reacting to it right now,
right,
or what that caused. So where did that have cause and effect in your life? Where did you actually now shift how you live your life, or what you're doing, or what you're involved in? And so part of the questions I would have, I wouldn't prescribe this, but to say is like, when you look at that, how deep or shallow are those engagements? And one of the things that I say often, and this is true for me, is that I will take an ounce of action over 30 tons of social media activism or posts. Like, it's worth way more to me. Now, I'm not discrediting some of the value that brings. I'm just saying in my life or in others, that's where I would challenge it to, is to say, if this is, what you're posting on, or if this is something you're jumping on board, then truly dig into what the issues are, and then center your life around that. Or move towards action within it, because without action, I don't know, my take would be is it's all pretty shallow.
Yeah, no, that's a good word. What would you say if you were to challenge or encourage a young adult in our community, and you could say anything around privilege or justice, what would you want to challenge them or encourage them with?
I would say number one for me is that you have the eyes on our culture at this moment, and and so don't dismiss the impact that you can have in creating some changes and shifts into our societal values. And so we're pretty stuck these days. I mean, I try and stay loose enough to say, hey, let's expose the ways that my life has maybe missed the mark on some of these pieces, and I want to remain teachable and open to those things in my life. But we're pretty stuck in the ways that we've developed and built our society, right? And so you have these fresh eyes that come into it, as every generation has, to say, we can clearly see what this is missing. And so that brings me great hope that there's emerging generations that are going to say, hey, we can see how to do this differently and to lead that way. So don't discount the value that you bring into that. And at the same time, be careful not to define yourself by what you're against, because I think that's part of what I struggle with, is that it's so easy, especially in a day where everything is exposed and everything you do is potentially going to be on the screen, because you just never know what's rolling. It's so easy to be able to pick apart things. But don't grow up and realize that you were never for something.
Wow.
That you were just always about dismantling something.
Yeah.
And so figure out what that is and let that drive you. So it's not that don't call out anything. By all means, like expose the stuff. And even in my life, like, hey, you say this, but look at this, like it's not matching. Like, I want that.
Yeah.
But I maybe don't want it, but I invite it because I know I need to.
Yeah.
And I do want it. But so don't take away those pieces. But I think you could quickly realize that you're just you get stuck in figuring out what to kind of dismantle. And dismantling is important at times, but
need to rebuild.
What is it? What drives you? What is that underlying, and then build around that. And maintain an optimistic outlook. Like, I think some of social media, I guess, or even just this time at this time of our society here, pessimism might be a little tricky to maneuver around, or maybe pessimism is the wrong word, but just a critical side to society can be there. But there's a lot of good and a lot of trustworthy pieces. Find something that you can believe in and define yourself around that, and let it dismantle through some of those positive moves versus just sitting back on a couch and using a pellet gun to see, because everything can really be dismantled. Everything, all of us, have broken outlooks on life. All of us carry brokenness in our viewpoints. So they can all be dismantled. But what are you going to do to build? That'd be
that's
what I'd
so
say.
good. I love that. I'm so excited to share this with our community, and I feel like it's just the beginning of a much larger conversation that us as young adults need to have. And so I'll be encouraging our community just continue this conversation, continue to ask those questions, and ask, how can I rebuild now what I'm dismantling? And so those were really good thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love what Jon challenged us with. He challenged us to be aware of the injustices around us, to be aware of our own privilege and how we can have a voice to impact our world. But then he also challenged us to not just destroy all of the flawed thinking that's in our society, but to actually work to rebuild something that God is calling us to. And right now, in the climate that we're in, with all of the racial tension going on our continent, this is real for us more than ever. We are looking at issues that have been going on for so long that now are just continuing to remind us of all the heartbreak in the world, all of the brokenness in the world. And it also reminds us that we have a voice, that we use it to correct all of the wrongs that have been happening for so long. So as our generation, we want our voice to be heard, but then we also want to surround our lives around these issues. This isn't just a trend that is going to be going on for a month or two. This is not just a fad. This is something that we need to be building our lives around. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming to just know, where do we start? How do we even begin to surround our lives with this? How do we even begin to be known by what we are for and by who we are for? And I think the first step that we can take is just becoming really aware. And so we're going to be posting some of the resources that as a community have been really helpful for us in becoming more aware of the injustices, of our own privileges, of the action steps that we can take. And we're just going to take one step forward to creating the world that God is calling us to, and one step forward in becoming a generation that is known by what we are for.